Okay, now things are going to start to get interesting. This chapter, if you like, or section of the guide is about DOM manipulation, or the DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. And the output that we've been doing so far from our JavaScript programs has just been output in the console. That's not how real JavaScript programs do their output. Real JavaScript programs do their input and their output through the web page. They use the web page as an interface, a graphical user interface, a special kind, that is then the interface for the JavaScript program. So the input is like mouse movements, keystrokes, things like that, interactions with the page of various kinds. And the output is changes to what's called the document object model, so changes to the page after it's been loaded. If you take a look at what's on the screen here, this serves as kind of the target. I would like you to be able to make a tic-tac-toe app at the end of this. I'm not going to ask you to do it because there are a million examples of it out there, and you can go and find the code and take a look at it yourself. But it would be a good little exercise for you to try. I have a working version of a tic-tac-toe app here, and the way it works is right now it's telling me that player X has to go. So I click here and I get an X and a little bit of blue, and now it says player O. So I click here, player X, player O, and then when somebody wins, the label down there goes away, and you get this line of red X's here. Then you can reset the game and try again. So the input to this program is mouse clicks. We're not going to do the input yet. Input's for next week. We're going to do the output part. So what happens in this program is when I click on something, a function is called, and that function makes changes to the page in JavaScript, a JavaScript function. So we're going to focus on writing JavaScript functions today that change the page, and then next week we'll hook them up to events like mouse clicks and stuff like that, and then we'll have the whole picture. Okay, so if let me do this again, but this time I'm going to right-click this middle part here and inspect. And you'll see that what this thing here is a table that's been styled to look like a tic-tac-toe board. So we're in the second row and we're in the middle TD element of that table. Now if I click on that cell, a function gets called, and you can see over here, I'm in the elements view here, what's happened. It's added some style, which wasn't there before. It changed the background color to light blue, and it also added some contents. So this TD element beside it here is empty. This one here now has an X in it. If I click the one beside it, you'll see that it takes away the light blue background color from here, adds it to here, and now this one has an O in it, and so on. And if you take a look at the label down here, it's changing. So it's a paragraph, and I have these span tags inside it, player, and then there's a span that has an ID and just has an X in it, and then it says go. If I click another one here, it'll change to O here, and so on. So that's how it does what it does. And when a player wins, like this, there are changes made. If I inspect this one here, it sets the color to red on the ones that were involved in the win. And then when I reset the game, it puts everything back to the way that it was before. So, so what we're going to focus on here is we're going to focus on programs, JavaScript functions that make changes. Now, there's this thing called the document object model. If we look at here, the DOM. So we usually call it the DOM. It stands for Document Object Model. If you take a look at the source for this page, you can see that it's pretty familiar looking. There's a doc type element, a comment, a head and a body, a table. What the browser does is, when it receives the response to its request, it gets this HTML code. It goes through it one line at a time, and it starts parsing it and creating objects. So there will be an HTML object in memory. Inside that HTML object are two other objects, a head and a body. Inside the head, there's a title object, two meta objects, and so on. Inside the body, there's an H1 element, and beside that a table element, and that table object or element has inside of it a row object which has TD objects inside of it, and so on. So what you end up with is this rich structure of objects, and those objects can be manipulated by the JavaScript program that you write. And when you do that, when you do a manipulation of an object, it automatically, the browser automatically updates the screen. So what we're looking at here in the elements view is the document object model, and it's not the same as the source. Here's one obvious difference. Notice I have a table element, and then inside of that a TR element. This is the source that I wrote. The document object model inserts another thing, a T-body, inside there, because Chrome wants there to be a T-body element inside there, and I didn't have one, so it put it in there for me. So when the browser constructs the DOM, it's an active process. It will fix things that it thinks need fixing. It will add stuff, remove things that don't make sense to it, and so on. So this is not the page source, even though it looks like the source that we're looking at. This is a visual representation of the browser's internal model of the page. And we can make changes to it here. So when I click here and put an X in this TD element, that hasn't changed the source. The source is the same as it ever was. It doesn't have anything inside there. I'm just making changes to the browser's internal picture of what's going on, and I can interact with this myself too. Like I can decide that wait, let me change this one here, that this should be red, and I can automatically change it here. So I can make changes. I can manipulate the DOM myself here and change the style rules down here and so on. It's a little sandbox to see what the page would look like if I did that. Okay, so this is the document object model that gets built when the page is loaded. Now over here, this one called Hello World, this is in the folder of code called DOM examples. I've put it into here we are. I've put it in here into my basic JS, which I'll upload along with the rest of the videos so that this code will be available to you. But I just took the DOM examples folder and put it here. The DOM examples folder, let's find it here. htdocs. I'm in basic JS, DOM example. So this is in the code. It's got a folder of images with 2 images in it. It's got a JavaScript folder that has some JavaScript, and a CSS folder that gives it some basic rules over here. So maybe we should load up the JavaScript. So there's the JavaScript that's part of this page. Let's load up the CSS as well so we can take a look at that. And finally, let's load up index.html. So here's index.html. Here's the JavaScript, and here's the CSS rules that go into making this page the way that it is. Okay, so what will happen is when as the browser reads this, I have an example here. It's a much simplified example of what's called the DOM tree. So if this is a much simplified example of that page, I've stripped out a lot of elements. So there's an HTML element and then a head element and a body element inside of that. And that's represented in a tree structure over here. So at the top is this object called the document, and it has a doc type. Inside the document is a doc type object and an HTML object. So then inside the HTML object is a head and a body. Inside the body is an H1 and an image, and so on. So you can represent this whole thing as a tree structure. We're not going to use much of the tree structure of it in this course, but I wanted you to know about it because if you want to do really advanced manipulation of the document object model, you need to know about it. There's a little bit of terminology here as well. We refer to these things as nodes. I'll also call them elements, HTML elements, when I'm talking about them. A node has a parent, so the body is just inside the HTML. So you can do this with any bracketed structure, by the way. You can look at a piece of Java code this way as well. It's things within things within things. You can represent that as a tree structure. And then inside the body, there's an H1 and an image element. So these two elements here are called siblings. We used to call them sister nodes back in the day, but now we call them siblings. So it's like sibling is just a gender non-specific term for brother or sister, in case you don't know that word sibling. So the body has a parent. It has children, and a node can also have siblings. So the head node here is the sibling of the body node because they share a parent. So that's just a little bit of terminology. Some of the tree terminology comes from family trees. So this is loosely a bit like a family tree, except most people have 2 parents, and DOM objects only have 1 parent. It's also kind of like an upside down biological tree, like a trees in the forest, the vegetable. Whatever, the plant, the tree plant. But it's upside down. So we would call this the root of the tree, and it kind of branches downwards, and then these are the leaves. So we refer to leaves and branches, roots, and we also refer to children, siblings, parents, and so on, to describe the relationships between these things. Now, if you want to access the DOM in the JavaScript console, you can do that. If I open the console here, you can see the DOM over here. This one's a bit more complicated than what I showed you, but it's kind of similar. It's got a div with an ID of container, an h1 and an image, and then it has some divs that actually have nothing in them, so you can't see them right now. If we go over into the console and type document, this is the object that contains everything. We can actually open it up in here, and you can see it's the exact same view, and it behaves in the same way. It highlights things on the left. It's the same view as the elements view. So this special variable document is what gives us access to and allows us to change things over here. And there's some built-in commands here already. So if you go change heading, did it work, like this, as it's suggesting up above, you can see it changes. I've called a JavaScript function that changes that heading. That's built into this. You can say change heading style as well. I'll let you guys play around with some of these. There's also there's change picture. I'll show you some of these functions in a minute, which changes the picture. And I also like drop heading, which uses an interval to do a little animation like that. So it drops the heading, uses set interval. If I reload, okay, so I've made all these changes to the page. It looks totally different than it did when I started. If I do view page source, it's still showing that it should have the smiley face image and a heading that says hello world and so on, but everything's moved and changed. If I reload this page, it's going to go back to the way that it was before. So it's going to go back to the server, send a request to the server, and get back the same page. And then over the life of the page, as I interact with it, I can make changes. Okay, so those are all some pre-baked examples. Let's talk about DOM manipulation. Okay, so I'm going to show you, there's lots of different ways to change the DOM. I'm going to show you some basic ideas here. There's two basic steps. If you want to change the DOM, you need to retrieve the element or the elements, the node from the DOM tree that you want to change, and then you have to change the content or the style or the attributes of the element that you've retrieved. So retrieve the elements, and then once you've retrieved them, they'll be in a variable, they'll be in a JavaScript variable, and then you can change them. So let's do that here. If we take a look at the source for this page, right here, what we've got here is, let's say we want to change the message. What I've done here is I've given a lot of things IDs and classes, because that's going to help a lot. So anytime you know that you're in advance that I'm going to want to change at some point the text or maybe the look of this message, give the element an ID. It has to be unique. And that's one of the easiest ways to pull that element out of the DOM after it's been created, is by its ID. So this thing has an ID of message. So what I do here is I say, let's give it a good name, heading equal document dot, and so document is an object that contains a bunch of methods that can help you out. Get element by ID message. And then what's heading? Oh, there it is. See, heading now contains just that message element. Now don't be fooled, it's not actually a text string, it's just printing itself that way. It's an object, it's a code object. And then I can change things about it once I've got it. So I used document.getElementById by ID to retrieve it, and now I can change stuff. So one of the basic things I can do is I could go heading, which was my variable name, dot inner HTML equals goodbye world. And then it changes right over there. See, all I did was, this is a variable, this is an instance variable that I assigned to, and it changes immediately. I can make it whatever I want, like that. I can even, if I want, since I'm using inner HTML, I could do something like this. I can embed code like this, HTML code into it. Sam is the greatest. Now you know what's really in my head. And when I do that, it will interpret that code and create new elements. So if we go over and take a look at the element view over here now, we can see H1 contains now an I element for italics, and then the text is the greatest. So we're changing what's over there, and it's interpreting it using inner HTML. It's adding code to it. So that's how you change the contents of an element. That's the first thing. If you want to change the look of an element, you have to access its style field. So this style is a complex object that has tons and tons of instance variables in it. It's got one instance variable for every possible CSS property. So one thing I might want to change is the color. And you do this, color equals, and then you can put any legal CSS color value here. So I'm setting color now. I could set it to hashtag RGB. Red, it's all full red, full green. I don't know if you guys know how these color tags work, but a color is a set of red, green, and blue values. Each one takes up 1 byte. A byte can go from 0 to 255. In hex codes, that's 00 to FF. So FF is 255. So this is full red, full green, no blue. So what color is that going to be? Do you know your color theory? It's going to be yellow. Oh, that doesn't look very nice. Style.color. You can also use these RGB values like this. You can say, give me no red, all blue, and half green. And it'll be some kind of turquoise or something, or a greeny color. Okay, so you can do this for any property you want. Border style equals solid, for example. But here's a problem. If I want to set the border style, that's a hyphenated property in CSS. That doesn't work very well here in the context of JavaScript code, because this looks to JavaScript like heading.style.border minus style. So that's not going to work very well. So what they've done is, there's a couple ways you can get around this, but the easiest way is to, whenever there's a hyphenated property, turn it into camel case. So first is lowercase, and then each new word has a new capital. So I've just changed the border style to solid, so I got a border around it, and so on. I think the outer div has an ID of container as well, so I can change that too. I can say let C equals document dot get element, not get animations, get element by ID container, and then C dot background color. Oh, I can't do that. Can't hyphenate it. Got to use background color like that. I've made another mistake here. Do you guys see it? It should be c.style.background color equals gray or something like that. And now I have a gray background color on the div. Okay, so that's how you change. Let's go back and take a look at the guide here. So here's me pulling out a message element, and then here I am changing the content, node.innerHTML, and I can embed HTML into it, and it will interpret that and create new objects. And here's me changing the style. So node.style.color, background color, position, left, top, and so on. So if I do this, I'm going to change, here's where you have to know your CSS. I'm going to change the positioning to relative, and then I can move it 100 pixels to the left and 200 pixels down when I do that. Okay. You can also change the class attribute of the element. So if I go over here and take a look at, let's take a look at the CSS here. Red container, for example. I don't know why it's called red container, but it's a class with a whole bunch of properties. So let's say I wanted to change the container to have an auto margin, a max width of 768 pixels, a big solid border on it, a light goldenrod yellow background color, and so on. If I wanted to do all those changes at once, a good way to do it would be to create a class like this, and then just, if from my JavaScript program, just add that class to the item. So here's what I can do. I go back, I'm going to reload to get things back to normal. I'm going to get the container like this, C equals document.getElement by ID container, and then I want to change the class name. You do that like this, class name equals red container. Did I get that right? Check over here. Oh, I got it wrong. See, it's all lowercase here. So I actually took away a class that it previously had, which is why that stuff disappeared. Let's try that again. Red container like this. There we go. So I changed the class from whatever it was originally to this new class, and I change all the properties at once. Let's do it again the right way. So it did look like this, and then with one change, I make everything, I change all the properties of it. So over in the elements here, the container now has a class of red container, whereas originally it had a class of container. So, you know, I can do this, and then I can, when I'm done with that, I can put it back to the way it was before, like that. Okay. Incidentally, combining this with some of the stuff we looked at last time, I can go set interval. I can create a function here, and I can put, let's see, equals document container, and then c.className equals red container, like that. So there's my function, which changes it to red container. I can say do that 1 second from now, and then hit enter, and 1 second later it changes. That kind of interacts with some of the stuff we were doing last week. Okay, what else? So that's how you change a class. If you want to change other attributes, you just use the name of the attribute. So class name is special. You don't use .class to change a class name. You just say class name. But if you want to, for example, change the source element of an image, source attribute of an image. So let's say we wanted to change the image just like this. Change, I think it's change picture. I wrote a function that does this. So it changes that image. How did I do that? Well, the image has an ID of pic. So I use document.getElementById to pull out that particular element. And then what I want to change is not the CSS or the contents of the image. The image is actually an empty element. What I want to change is this attribute, src. So that's what this function does that I just called. If we take a look at DOM examples, change picture, uses getElementById to get the picture, and then does node.src equals images / bird.png. If I copy that, I can put it in the console over here, and I can change it back to, I think it's smiley. Nope. The images might be called smiley.jpg. Let's try that. There it is, smiley.jpg. So any changes you make are instantly reflected on the page. So what we're not doing right now is having changes in response to the user, but that's the next step. Okay, what else do I want to talk to you guys about? Yeah, one more thing. Sometimes you want to manipulate all the elements at once. So you can do that with query selector all. So if we go, let's go to a Wikipedia page like it suggests there. And let's call up the page for Mohawk College. Here it is. And we'll go into the console over here. If I do this, let nodes equal document.querySelectorAllP. I can put any CSS selector there. So the CSS selector is the thing you put at the beginning of the rule that says which elements you want it to apply to. And now nodes is a node list object, which you can treat like an array of all the P elements in the article. So this is all the paragraph elements in this article. And I can change them all at once if I want. I can create a little, I can go for, so they're stored in a variable called nodes. Let I equal 0, I less than nodes.length, I plus plus, and then I could say nodes I dot inner HTML equals, I don't know, Mohawk College rules. Or actually, let's get even more specific. Let's say CSAT rules. Okay, and that if I got that text right, yep, there we go. Everywhere, all the text has been replaced with CSAT rules all over it. So sometimes you want to be able to, oh, some warnings just came out. We can ignore those. Sometimes you want to be able to pull out, retrieve, and change a whole bunch of elements all at once, and that's how you do it. Now, of course, I haven't really changed the page. I've only changed my local copy of it. When I reload, everything's going to go away. There's another example here. This is how you would select everything with that class, mw/body-content. I don't know if this still works. It depends whether Wikipedia has changed itself or not. Oh yeah, that gives me 3 nodes. There are 3 body content nodes. Yeah, so you can put any legal CSS selector there, and it will pull out and create a list of nodes for you that you can then iterate over using a for loop like this. You can also use this. This is a newish piece of Java syntax. It's a for each method. It's built into all JavaScript arrays. So you go name of the array dot for each, and then you have a function that takes one argument, and it's going to take one at a time. It's going to take all of the things out of the nodes array and put them into node here, and then you can run this code on it. It's kind of a different take on the for each loop. So I can do this, and I just changed all the nodes in the node list to red. But most of the time, I think it's fair to say most of the time we're going to be changing one element at a time, which means the thing you're going to use more than anything else is going to be get element by ID. Okay, I hope that was fairly clear. I think that's everything in this section. Yeah, so we're going to leave events and for next week. That's when we're going to start writing these functions to access things independently or in response to a user input. So let's go take a look at the exercises here. So it says write a JavaScript program in a .js file and load it into a web page using a script element. This is a take on the hello world function from before, but this time it's going to put n paragraph elements on the page, each with the content hello world in green or goodbye world in red if the parameter was odd. So let me show you this running. Okay, we're back. I found it. It's named wrong. It's exercise 1 part 2. This is what it is. Hello 5. We'll put goodbye world here as a single paragraph. And if I say hello with an even number like 10, it will say hello world in green in the console like this. So yeah. So I want you to create that. So what I've got is I've got a container inside the body here, and I have one little function which I can access out here, which is going to go to the container and basically change its inner HTML, but using a loop if it's an even number, and if it's an odd number, like 1, it just puts in a single element that says goodbye world. And you can see you can change the color any way you want. I have classes defined, so I'm changing the class here. I go back to here, class is hello now. So that's how I'm changing the color. Anyways, I want you guys to give that one a try, and I'm giving you some extra time kind of this week. We only had 3 videos. So think about trying the other one here, the other ones. So yeah, I'll let you read over them, but give them a try. And oh, move me is fun. Let's take a look at move me right here. So move me, I give you some starter code, which you can find in the code block, which looks like this. And if you inspect this, this is a div element inside of a div container, and it has position absolute. They both have position absolute, which means I can use top and left to move things around. So if I change this top to 100 pixels, see it moves down like that. If I change left to 50 pixels, it moves over. So there's a function called, I think it's move, and it just picks a random location and changes the top and left property of that thing to move it around. And this one develops as we go through. So after a while, you add some buttons to move it up, down, left, and right. And then eventually, if you get there, you can have it sort of bouncing around inside the container, which is kind of cool. So I'd like you to give those things a try. And next week, we'll come back and we'll take a look at events and how to do event handling in JavaScript. And that's when we're going to have to really start using the properties of functions, passing anonymous functions, putting functions inside of functions, and so on to make that work. Okay, so I'll see you in class probably, and then in the next video next week.